My name is Richard and I'm from Jerseyville, Illinois. I'm 73 now, but I had a life-changing experience in July of 1968 when I was 15 years old. We lived on a farm and had a huge cornfield, so by that age I had been helping my dad for years and had a pretty good work ethic. I had also been driving my dad's truck and tractor around our property since I was 12 and was pretty comfortable with driving way before I had my license. That summer, I had been spending time with a girl named Barbara who I couldn't keep my eyes off of. We went to school together and she lived just a few minutes down the road from us. One day, my two best friends and I were in town with Barbara and her two friends. I will always remember this day, even though we didn't do much of anything, because before we all went home that evening, Barbara gave me my first real kiss and it just about knocked me off my feet. As a young boy, I didn't know what to do with myself after it happened, but before we all went home, she said something about how she had always wanted a boy to surprise her by putting flowers on her bedroom windowsill late at night so she could find them in the morning. I didn't know where she got that idea from, but the second she said it, I knew I was going to be the boy that did it. I need to quickly interject here and say that what I did that night was so stupid and out of character for me, and if my dad had caught me, I would have gotten his belt without a doubt. I absolutely knew better, but since I had been head over heels for this girl, it affected my decision-making skills. Before I went to bed, I picked a handful of flowers from my mom's garden, wrapped them up in brown paper with a little note, and tied the whole thing together with twine. I sat in my room and stayed awake until 1 o'clock in the morning, then snuck out of our side door and took my dad's older truck that we parked on the side of our barn. This truck was a 55 GMC that was mostly used for work and didn't leave the property that much. I remember pushing it in neutral as far from the barn as I could before starting it because I did not want to wake anybody up. Once I got it going and out onto the road, I was definitely sweating from fear, but also because of the mission I was on. I had never done anything like it before, and while I had driven that truck plenty, taking it in the middle of the night like that felt like it was on the same level as robbing a bank to me. But I was so focused on Barbara that I probably would have driven up to Canada if she'd asked. When I got to her house, I parked a few hundred feet away from their driveway and ran up to her windowsill. I was scared to death that her dog was going to hear me and start barking. Then one of her parents would get up and catch me, and that was terrifying, especially if it was her dad. I laid the bundle of flowers on the windowsill as quietly as I could, then ran straight back to the truck and started driving home. This road was a dirt road, and on both sides of it were acres and acres of cornfields. I was going slow, but it was still only a 5-minute drive back to my house. It was on that road where something happened that changed my life forever. I had only gotten about a minute away from Barbara's house when the headlights started acting up. They were flickering off and on and getting brighter and dimmer. Then they went out completely, and within seconds the engine stalled and the whole truck just died. This put me into a real state of panic, and I mean this was a live or die situation because the only thing I could think about was my dad. If his truck had actually broken down out there, I would never see the light of day again. I got out and was going to check under the hood even though I didn't know what I'd even be looking for. I just knew I had to do something, but when I shut the door, I felt this wind on me and I heard the lowest sound I think I've ever heard. When I turned around, there was something huge in the air coming right over my head, moving south to north. What I saw was a pitch-dark object, and it couldn't have been more than a couple of 100 feet off the ground. There wasn't a light or a beacon or even a reflection on the thing. It was completely black from front to back. There wasn't a single sound coming out of it either. There was only this wind coming down, and it was strong enough to blow my hair around. I stood in the middle of the road and watched it go all the way over me, then out above the field. I can remember wondering if this was what a flying saucer looked like, but the truth is it didn't look anything like what I had always seen in pictures and movies. It wasn't even close. This object wasn't round. It was much closer to a trapezoid shape or a rough triangle with a flat or rounded point on the front. What shocked me the most, though, was the lack of lights. It really blended in with the dark sky, but at the same time I could see that it was blocking out the stars above it. It looked like a piece of pure darkness moving through the sky, and it was as terrifying as it was unbelievable. I know one thing for sure, I didn't move a muscle as it went over me. I don't know if I thought it couldn't see me if I was still, but I stayed like a statue. When it got over the cornfield, the only thing I wanted to do was get out of there and get back home, so I got in the truck without even remembering it had died and turned the key. Miraculously, the engine turned over immediately. There was no hesitation or struggle to start. It was perfect, like nothing was wrong with it. Then I drove home faster than I'd ever driven anything on 4 wheels. Thank God I still had enough sense left in me to get my speed up on our driveway so I could kill the engine and coast up to the barn. No matter what had just happened, I knew I couldn't make any noise. Long story short, I got away with it and my dad never found out I had taken his truck. I did confess and tell him this entire story later on, but it wasn't until I was much older. For days after this, I couldn't think about anything else, not even Barbara, and that's saying something. I was completely focused and almost obsessed with what I'd seen because it was unlike anything I could have even imagined back then. The only person I talked to was my best friend and neighbor, Billy. My story put him into a level of excitement I had never seen in him before, and he started asking me questions about meeting aliens and which planet I thought they were from. He was thinking about the whole thing like it was a movie, but it wasn't like that at all. It was so much stranger than anything I had seen or heard of at the time, and it was so far from what I thought something like that would look like that I didn't have words for it. I even sketched a picture of it with a pencil and paper just because I wanted to see it again. 3 or 4 days after my sighting, and right about the time I was starting to feel a little more back to normal, I noticed something on the underside of my wrist when I had a long sleeve shirt on while working with my dad. When I lifted up my sleeve, it looked like I had gotten a splinter because the skin was raised up and it hurt when the fabric rubbed on it. Later that night, I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed and started picking at it because something was stuck under the skin. I got my pocket knife and tweezers, and maybe this sounds crazy now, but the way I grew up, we would just cut splinters out. I poked my knife in on one side where I thought it went in. Then after trying to push it out, I could see the end of something in there. I believed it was a normal splinter I got from outside, so I grabbed the tip of it with the tweezers and pulled it all the way out. Then I saw right away it wasn't wood. It was the tiniest piece of metal. It was the shape and size of a grain of rice if you cut it in half the long way, and surprisingly, it didn't have a sharp end or point on it. It was just a thin sliver of metal, and I can still remember it perfectly. Being 15, I didn't think to question where it had come from or why it was in my arm. I just tossed it in the toilet. After a splash of Bactine, I went on with my night, and for a long time I didn't think about this. It wasn't until I was much older that I started to question the piece of metal in my arm and how it had shown up right after I'd had a close encounter. These days, I do feel like it had something to do with it. I know that's just speculation, and I didn't have any kind of abduction or time that I can't account for, but I've lived long enough to know when something in life doesn't feel right, and that has never felt right to me. For anybody wondering, the answer is yes. Barbara got the flowers on her windowsill. She did love them, but we never ended up becoming a couple. I met my wife after high school, got married in 1976, and we've been together ever since. Even as an old man, I think about how incredible this was. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. I've gone back to that same spot on more than one occasion too, even at night, and I can still picture the black shape going over me. It's really amazing to me that a single 60-second event can change who you are forever. Back in 1998, 2 of my friends and I decided to drive down to Lake Havasu for spring break. It was me, Alexa, and Amy. We had all just turned 21 and we were beyond excited to finally take a trip where we could legally drink. We took Alexa's Ford Tempo, which wasn't a flashy car by any means, but it was good enough for a road trip. We broke up the drive by staying one night at Amy's cousin's house in Vegas, then had a little too much fun that night and got a really late start leaving the next day. When we left her cousin's house, it was already dark and we took whatever highway it is that cuts over to Arizona right after you leave Vegas. After an hour or so of driving toward Lake Havasu, we saw an exit for the Oatman Highway, which is part of the historic Route 66, and we thought it would be fun to check it out. When I think back on this now, it was a really stupid decision for 3 young women to take a highway like that in the middle of the night, but at that time we were naive and thought it would be an adventurous little late-night detour. We quickly found out that the Oatman Highway was nothing like the main highway. It starts out straight, then gets extremely narrow and windy, especially when you get into the part with all the hills and switchbacks. You're constantly going up and down and around tight corners where you can't see anything ahead of you. Even during the daytime, I would imagine it's a road you'd need to take slowly, but at night it felt pretty sketchy because it was so dark out there and it's in the middle of nowhere. Somewhere along that winding part, we came around a corner and got behind this big truck that was pulling a trailer behind it. It looked like a U-Haul moving truck, and the trailer was completely full and covered with a black tarp. The first thing I remember thinking was that a truck that size should never have been on that road because it couldn't even make it into the turns without going into the oncoming lane. The second thing, and I think we all thought this, was that we were never going to get around the guy and they weren't pulling over to let us pass. We were behind this truck for several miles and Alexa was getting extremely impatient. After following it to the top of a hill at a painfully slow speed, we had just started going down the other side. Then as the road went into a sharp corner, this extremely bright flash of white light came from in front of the truck. I thought something exploded on the road, and I can't stress enough how blinding it was. I couldn't even see anything for a few seconds. The driver of the truck reacted too and violently swerved into the oncoming lane, then steered back into the right lane and the whole back of it slid sideways with the trailer literally bouncing across the road. I remember seeing smoke coming from some part of the truck when it finally stopped on the right-hand shoulder. It was mostly off the pavement, but the trailer was perpendicular to the road, still blocking all of our lane and part of the oncoming one. Alexa had also slammed on the brakes and we stopped about 1 car length away from the side of the trailer. At that point, there was still a bright light coming from the other side of the truck, even after the flash we'd seen. We couldn't tell where it was coming from or what it was because the tall box part of the truck was blocking our view, but it was bright enough that we could see it shining through every gap and around the edges of the truck and trailer. The 3 of us stayed in the car trying to figure out what was going on, and I don't remember saying much, probably because it had happened so fast. Then the truck's passenger door flew open and a guy climbed out. I assumed he was either the passenger or maybe the driver getting out of the other side. The only thing he did was jump down to the ground and run around the front of the truck toward the other side where we couldn't see him anymore. This was when our situation got scary. Right when the guy ran around the truck, Alexa's radio started freaking out and the station we'd been listening to got all staticky and intermittent. It sounded like it was between stations, but worse, and it kept cutting in and out and making these crazy noises. This really scared all of us, and Alexa shut off her car because she didn't want to hear it. Then it got unbelievably quiet. Just picture the 3 of us sitting out there alone in the desert in this situation. It was kind of terrifying. Then the most insane thing I've ever seen happened. We were just about to get out of the car to see what was happening on the other side of the truck when this huge bolt of light shot up into the sky. I can only describe it as being close to lightning, except it wasn't zigzagging and random. It was a perfectly straight line that went straight up. It only lasted a second, then was immediately followed by a massive booming crack of thunder that was unbelievably loud. It was so powerful it shook the car and made all 3 of us scream at the same time. Amy was in the back seat saying lightning couldn't even be possible because it was completely clear out. There wasn't even a cloud in the sky. Right after the thunder, everything went totally dark. The light on the other side of the truck was gone, and the only thing we could see were our headlights on the side of the trailer and the truck's headlights shining off the side of the hill. Alexa completely lost it at that point and was panicking and saying we needed to get out of there. She backed up maybe 10 feet, then drove around the back of the trailer by going into the almost non-existent rocky shoulder on the edge of the oncoming lane. And as we went past the truck, I looked out my window hoping to see what had caused all of this, but I didn't see anything or anyone. I have no idea what happened to the guy who climbed out of the truck. As soon as we got around, Alexa flew down the hill going way faster than we should have been going, but neither one of us said a word to her about it because we were just as scared as she was. I think it took another full hour to get off of that highway and down to our hotel in Lake Havasu City, and we were pretty freaked out the entire time. Once we got into the room, things finally started to calm down, but we didn't know if we should call the police or tell the hotel or what to do. In the end, we did nothing and just stayed in our room talking about it for the rest of the night. I wouldn't say what happened ruined our trip because we did stay, but it did change our attitudes. It was just kind of hanging there over our heads the whole time. Things didn't really end there either. While we finished out the trip, Alicia's car got possessed and started having small but odd problems with the electrical system. From the minute we drove away from the scene on that highway, her radio never worked correctly again. It would randomly lose stations and turn itself off and on, and this lasted until she sold the car. Another problem was with the dashboard lights. Her car was a manual and it had this annoying little shift light that would come on and tell you when to change gears. It had always worked fine, but after that trip, the light would flicker constantly no matter what gear you were in, and when it would do it, a bunch of the other warning lights would join in and do the same thing. Something had seriously messed up the electrical system in that car. A lot has happened in our lives since this experience. Amy ended up moving to the East Coast and I lost touch with her a long time ago, but Alexa and I are still friends. This story will come up occasionally, but it was so long ago now that I don't think about it that much. I do still wonder what we drove into, and I especially wonder about the guy who got out of the truck. I know we probably should have made sure he was okay, but we were so young then and so scared. I do regret not reporting it or telling someone. I've looked around a little online for any reports about sightings or even explosions around Oatman that year, but I've never found anything. As far as I know, there are only 4 people who even know this happened, the 3 of us and the guy in the truck. And since he ran toward what we saw, he has to know a lot more than we do. I spent most of my life with a very clear memory of getting several baby teeth pulled at the dentist when I was young. I could mentally picture myself in the chair and the dentist leaning over me with an assistant on each side. This has been with me for decades, and because of it, I've always taken extremely good care of my teeth. I've never skipped an appointment and I've gone in every 6 months like clockwork. I'm 48 and still have never had a single cavity. I went to the same dentist for a lot of years, then she ended up moving her entire practice to another state, so I had to switch to someone new and I went with her recommendation. During my very first appointment at the new office, they did all the normal first visit things like x-rays and paperwork, then did a cleaning. As soon as she started, the hygienist was making small talk and made a comment about how perfect my teeth were. I laughed about it and told her how anal I am about keeping everything clean, then casually mentioned having a bunch of my baby teeth pulled when I was a kid, and that was why my adult teeth had come in so straight. She had a mask on, but I could see her frown like she was confused when I said it. Then she asked if I had injured them or had a problem with decay because it was unusual to have teeth pulled like that. I let her know it wasn't either of those reasons and that I honestly didn't know why they had been pulled. It was just something I had always remembered happening. The way she had reacted really made me think more deeply about it though, and I got curious enough that I called my mom to ask her about it. My mom had always been home when we were growing up and my dad worked, so she was the one who took us to our doctor and dentist appointments. When I asked her why I'd had my baby teeth pulled, she acted like I was crazy. She said I had never had a tooth pulled in my life, and especially none of my baby teeth because she'd been there every time they fell out on their own. According to her, I had always had perfect, straight, and healthy teeth even when I was little. When I accepted the fact that she had to be right and this memory wasn't real, it was a pretty big shock because I could remember it so well. I was trying to understand what could have made me think my teeth had been pulled and where that came from. My mom thought that I had most likely had a dream about it when I was younger, since dreams about losing teeth are fairly common, and initially I agreed with her, but I really wasn't happy with that answer and I kept questioning if it was right. It got to a point where it was annoyingly on my mind, so I decided to try something that might jog my memory. I have always enjoyed listening to these light-guided meditations with my earbuds before I go to sleep. The ones I like to use are from a guy named Andrew Johnson who has a perfect voice and accent for it. They are just short little general meditation tracks with quiet background music and Andrew's voiceover telling you to relax. They work great to knock me out at night, but I thought I would try to use them to visually put myself back into this memory. This worked surprisingly well, and the first night I tried it, I noticed that a lot of the details seemed different to me. Right off the top, when I closed my eyes and pictured myself there again, I don't think I was sitting in a chair like I would have been at a dental office. I was more flat on my back, like I was on a table. Then I tried to focus on other things around me, and it became one of those frustrating sensations like when you feel a word on the tip of your tongue but can't quite say it. There was definitely something there, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Just remembering those few extra details led me to doing this every night before falling asleep, and days later something else finally came to me, and it wasn't even during my nightly meditation, it was at the strangest possible time. I have a membership at our public swim center and gym where I go after work a few nights a week. Usually I'll work out for about an hour, then swim a few laps before going home. I was in the busy pool one day with two older guys swimming on either side of me, and out of nowhere this picture came into my mind. It was a visual of the dentist who had been working on me when I was a kid, but he looked very abnormal and I could see his big, completely bald head looking down at me. After I got home that night, I went to bed and did my meditation again to see if anything else might come from this new image I had, and I was focusing so hard on the dentist. More details did come to me, and what I started to realize is that the two assistants that had been there looked exactly like him. All three of them were bald and identical and had this disturbing look to them. They were honestly more creature-like than human, and it really made me wonder why this hadn't bothered me as a kid. The longer I stayed on this image, the more I was getting from it, and it stopped feeling like a dental appointment. Nothing about the setting and the scene were right. I got to a point where I knew I wasn't having my teeth pulled, and what I had been remembering was this main figure leaning in close to my face and counting my teeth. He was touching each one of them with his finger. I also got the overwhelming feeling that he was trying to keep my attention focused on my mouth while the other two figures were doing something to my lower body. I don't know what was going on or what was being done to me, but I definitely didn't believe it was a trip to any dentist or doctor. What makes this even crazier is that the memory had never scared me. It didn't make me fear dental work or doctors in any way. If anything, it had the opposite effect where it made me want to go in more and take even better care of my teeth. Looking at everything differently was alarming because I didn't know what could have caused it. I have this entire story written out in detail in a notebook, and I've gone over it so many times hoping something else will surface, but it hasn't yet. I can say with a pretty high level of confidence that what I experienced was from a real event and not from a dream. Something happened to me when I was a kid that I just didn't understand at the time, and after doing some research, I've come to believe that it may have been some kind of abduction or alien encounter. I think the part where my teeth were being counted was their way of keeping my attention occupied and focused while the other two did something to my body. I've never been able to figure out what they were doing or why, and I've never found any scars or marks on my body that I can't explain. But since I was distracted and calm, I think the memory of it stayed buried and masked as something totally ordinary, like a visit to the dentist. Now all I can do is live with it, but I won't ever stop trying to remember more because I really want to know what was done to me. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.